Welcome to Center Theater Group's Live Watch series. My name is Jesus Reyes. I am the Community Partnerships Director at Center Theater Group, and today I come to you from the ancestral lands of the Chumash and Tongva people. We're kicking off Live Watch with a partnership with FilAM ARTS to present Valor by Fran de Leon. Following the video, my colleague Aura Ilag will host a conversation between Fran and Giselle Tongi Walters from FilAM ARTS. Originally, Valor was set to be part of our free library play reading series, but with COVID shutting down libraries and theaters, Fran quickly reimagined her play into a short multimedia video. I'd like to thank the California Arts Council and the Friars Charitable Trust for continuing supporting education and community programs. Thank you all and enjoy Valor.
I was all set to have a reading of my work in progress with the Center Theater Group's Library Reading Series in April 2020, which of course didn't happen. All of theater is paused, but storytelling, or making cuento, as Filipinos call it, that doesn't have to wait, especially not for true accounts of uncommon valor, patriotism and betrayal, immigrants' hopes, a country's broken promise, and the uncovering of my family history. This all started as a 15-minute movement piece commissioned by Playwrights Arena for Grand Park's Our LA Voices. The festival's theme was Origins, so I decided to explore the origin of historic Filipinotown in Los Angeles. I was born 2 miles south and grew up 8 miles north, but it wasn't until I was an adult that my connection to the area started to mean something more than the place we'd grab authentic Filipino food. Don't get me wrong, if you're looking for the real deal, historic Filipinotown, or hi-fi as the locals call it, that's where you want to go. You say Bahay Kubo to any FilAM and yeah, they'll think about the indigenous bamboo houses on stilts, but they're also going to get hunger pangs for Hi-Fi's Bahay Kubo, home of traditional Filipino eats. I figured I'd take this opportunity to get to know the area a little bit better. I found out that you can take a tour of Hi-Fi in the vehicle that is ubiquitous in the Philippines. A jeepney. See, the U.S. Army had brought all these jeeps along with them during World War II, and when the war was over, they didn't want to ship them back, so they left hundreds and hundreds of them behind. Filipinos, being the creative creatures that they are, turned a drab four-wheeler and decked it out with bright colors, shiny objects, and of course, a horn. You're gonna need that in Manila traffic. It's the nation's trademark for public transportation. The PWC, Filipino Workers Center, they conduct this tour. And they own the only working jeepney in Southern California, which was a real blessing to me, because I decided I wanted to start that movement piece with the performers getting driven into Grand Park in a jeepney. It was my nod to my favorite movie musical, the one that made me want to be an actor in the first place. Do you know which one I'm talking about? On the Hi-Fi tour, you're going to see more of these bright colors, driving around to some of the highlights. This here is Unidad Park, home to the nation's largest Filipino-American mural. Gintong kasaysayan, gintong pamana. Translated, a glorious history, a golden legacy. Thanks in large part to SIPA, search to involve Filipino-Americans, the mural pays homage to some prominent Filipinos and Filipino-Americans who you've probably never heard of because they're not in any mainstream history books, even though they should be. Among them, labor leader Larry Itliong, the actual initiator of the Delano grape strike. Thanks to Larry, Cesar Chavez, and Dolores Huerta, the Filipino and Mexican farm workers presented a united front. And there's Carlos Bulosan, a poet, novelist, and union organizer. Among his many works, America is in the Heart. And this one was an eye-opener even for me. Two-time Olympic gold medal diver Victoria Manalo Draves. Not only was she the first Asian American to win the gold, she was straight up the first American woman to bring these medals home. And on North Lake Street, there's a community center with a skate park. And this. The first monument in the United States honoring the Filipino-American veterans of World War II.
I think it is well that we review the history, a bit of the history of World War II. On July 26, 1941, the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, invited the Filipinos, issued a military order and said, "Join our forces in the Far East. And if you do, at the end of the war, you will be entitled to, apply for citizenship and receive all the benefits of a veteran of the United States." That was a promise made by the President of the United States.
Filipino guerrillas on Luzon, joining up with General MacArthur Jenks, taking the oath of allegiance and receiving American arms. Fighters with intense hatred for Japs, many of their comrades are already on the battlefront. The civilian situation is desperate, particularly for women and children, but they're cheerful under hardship. Food at last after days of starvation. As MacArthur drove on Manila, retreating Japs ruthlessly destroyed everything. But relief for all is in sight.
My parents got married around wartime in the Philippines. My mom has told me a handful of stories, and I knew my dad had been a guerrilla soldier. But most of what I knew about the war, I learned at school. And Filipinos were never mentioned. What did I know about the war?
Here is the motion picture record released by the United States Navy of the havoc wrought by the Japs' sneak sky and sea raid on Pearl Harbor, America's mid-Pacific naval bastion.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands.
Wait, did he just say that they attacked the Philippines hours after Pearl Harbor? How come nobody talks about that? Not even my mom. I asked her if we could sit down so that I could record her cuentos for my research. She's 92, and she loves sending us lengthy texts with her cuento-cuentuhans, so she was more than happy to sit down with me. My ma, Stella de Lupin was 13 when the Japanese first occupied Manila in 1941. We started with what happened during the early days of occupation. You know what? I'll just let her take over for this part.
When there was news about their coming in already to the city, Lolo's friend, the president of FEU, and Lolo was vice president. He had a big house in Taft Avenue. And he told Lolo, because we were more on the outskirts, merong railroad track, fields and all that. So he asked Lolo to come stay in their house. Mm-hmm. We were many families na parang that was our hideout.
Mom was one of 6 children. Her oldest sister, my Tita Chuling, was married to Horacio Consing. I always assumed he was either in the Philippine Army or a guerrilla, like my dad.
No, it was with the priest, Father Reuter. He recruited the Ateneo students that were there. Basta they were spies. They were acting, by themselves for the U.S.
Turns out, Father Reuter was an American Jesuit priest who moved to the Philippines when he was 22. I would have liked this guy. He taught theater, wrote plays, produced and directed, and apparently recruited for the underground. I didn't realize Tito Horacio was a spy. He and my Tita Chuling got married just before the war, and they had a 1-year-old son at the time of invasion, my oldest cousin, Todi.
Okay, the next day, here, the officials come. They said, all right, we will just bring him and we'll bring him back. So he kisses Tita Chuling and Todi. And we never saw him.
Horacio was held here, in Fort Santiago, for 2 years awaiting trial. And then they got word that he was being moved to a new location.
We came home. They told us that Tito Horacio's soldiers were beheaded. They were made to dig. All of them had to kneel down and each one. I didn't.
Around the same time, my future uncle, who would marry my Tita Chit, was part of the Bataan Death March. Over 75,000 Filipinos and American troops surrendered and were made to walk 65 miles to prison camps. Over 10,000 soldiers died in that march, from exhaustion, sedentary, shotgun to the head, or a bayonet to their ribs. 1,000 of them were American. 9,000 were Filipino. Sa grasya ng Diyos, as my mom says, by God's grace, Tito Rick survived, married my Tita Chit, had 10 kids, and later migrated the family to the States. Mom told me that she and her younger sister, Tita Terry, wanted to be a part of the resistance, but my Lola wouldn't have it. Said they were too young and it was too dangerous. But I knew there had to be women who joined up. So I did some digging, or rather some Googling, and I found that approximately 1 in 10 guerrillas were in fact female. There was Carmen Rosales, who would become the highest paid actress for Sampaguita films. She joined a guerrilla group after her husband was killed by the Japanese during the occupation. She was a sharpshooter who would disguise herself with a mustache. She was somehow involved in the assassination of a Japanese collaborator, and a Japanese colonel fell in love with her, stole her away to the province, and forced her to star in a Japanese propaganda film, which never got finished because the Americans finally arrived. After the war, she went back to Sampaguita Films to star in a semi-autobiographical film, Guerrillera. Remedios Gomez Paraiso. She was dubbed the Joan of Arc of the Philippines and was a teenage beauty queen. Her father was mayor of their small town, and when he organized a resistance, he was tortured, hung, and exhibited in their town square. Remedios took off and joined the Hukbalahap resistance with the code name WWII, which means dawn. They started her off as a nurse, but she was all about combat and became Commander WWII. Even when she was outnumbered and told to retreat, she and her squadron stood their ground and won the Battle of Camansi. She's quoted as saying, "I am fighting for the right to be myself." Commander WWII always showed up to battle with red lipstick, nails manicured, and her hair did. She passed away in 2014 at the age of 95. And then I found Valeria Panlilio, known as Colonel Yai, a Filipino-Irish-American living in Manila. I devoured her autobiography, The Crucible, where she chronicles her life as a journalist, turning triple agent spy, escaping the city, joining Marquing's guerrillas, and quickly rising to the ranks of colonel. She also happened to fall in love with Marquing himself. Remember I told you that my mom likes texting? I sent her one to see if I could get more detailed info on my dad's unit. What are the odds that I'd read about Marquing's guerrillas and find out that my dad was actually in it? Mom didn't know a whole lot more, and my dad passed away in 1995, so it seemed that would be the extent of my serendipitous uncovering. But, sa grasya ng Diyos, he kept a file folder on each one of us kids. Letters, cards, pictures, my kindergarten graduation program, and more letters, where he wrote about his time serving with none other than Colonel Yai.
When we reached the main headquarters of Marquing's guerrillas in the Sierra Madre Mountains, I thought he was a good-looking young mestizo in khaki uniform, complete with holstered gun and ammunition belt, sitting on a rock under the leaves of a nipa hut. It was a young woman named Yai Panlilio. She renamed me Frankie, which stuck all during and after the war. After 2 or 3 days, guerrilla leader Marcos Villa Agustin suddenly returned to the base camp at the head of a tough-looking bunch carrying various firearms. He was an attractive figure, lean and stern. He spoke with a heavy Visayan accent, Ilonggo. He was every inch the man Yai described to me.
And then there were these files, filled with appeals to the VA, trying to get back pay for 22 months of service and his old age pension, all of which were denied. I'll let Senator Inoue explain.
The Congress of the United States passed a law authorizing Filipinos who wish to be naturalized to do so. And upon naturalization and receipt of citizenship, they were entitled to all the benefits. 470,000 volunteered, and many died, as we know. Most of the men who marched on the Bataan Death March were not Americans. They were Filipinos. But then, when the war ended and the Congress of the United States in March of 1946 repealed that law, denying the Filipinos and reneging on the promise we made.
And sadly, the proud service of many of these Filipino veterans was never fully recognized by the United States. was an injustice. So in recent years, my administration, working with Congress and others, have worked to right this wrong. We passed a law, reviewed the records, processed claims, and nearly 20,000 Filipino veterans from World War II and their families finally received the compensation they had earned, and it was the right thing to do.
Today is an opportunity to honor the service of the more than 250,000 Filipinos who answered the President Roosevelt's call to arms, and who fought bravely under the American flag during World War II.
We've waited far too long to recognize these heroes who deserve this honor in standing alongside units like the Tuskegee Airmen and Hawaii Zone 442nd 100th Infantry Battalion with being awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, our nation's highest civilian honor.
I am Celestino Almeida, a 100-year-old veteran of World War II.
In October 2019, my cousins received the gold medal awarded posthumously to their father, the Bataan Death March survivor, Dr. Ricardo Sebastian. My dad never did receive his old age pension or his back pay. He did get a 21-gun salute at his funeral, and his second wife and daughter were given the flag. Maybe one of these days, I'll put in the application to receive the gold medal for Captain Francisco Aranda de Leon. Thanks for your service, Dad.
Welcome to CTG's Live Watch, Valor by Fran de Leon, or how I instinctively pronounced it, Valor by Fran de Leon, brought to you in partnership with FilAM Arts. My name is Aurora Elog, and I am the Education and Community Partnerships Administrative Assistant at Center Theater Group, and I will be your moderator this evening. I am calling in from the land of the Chumash, Tongva, and Keats. I invite everyone to use the chat feature to introduce yourselves and share what native land you are calling from. There's a link in the chat and on the screen for those who'd like to look it up. I'd also like to take this time to thank our ASL interpreter, Lucy Annette, for joining us this evening. Thank you, Lucy. So before we begin, I'd like to share more about the Valor Filipino World War II Veterans Memorial seen in Fran's video. This memorial is located in Lake Street Park here in Los Angeles and was the first Filipino World War II Veterans Memorial in the country and was commissioned by Eric Garcetti. This memorial was created by public artist Sherry Gulke. To learn more about Gulke's work of art, check the link in the chat and on the screen. It is so nice to be here with my kababayan, even if it's over the interwebs. So it is my pleasure this evening to introduce our speakers, writer and director, Fran de Leon, and FilAM Arts Director of Programming, Giselle G. Tonji Walters. Thank you both for joining us for this Q&A.
Hi.
I'd like to share with our audience and acknowledge that today is a special day in the Philippines, as it is November 2 in the PI, All Souls Day. During All Souls Day, families would gather in cemeteries to honor past loved ones, celebrating with food, flowers, and sharing stories with family. I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment to think of their loved ones who have passed. Thank you all for joining me in that moment. Ladies, do you mind introducing yourselves and letting us know what land you're calling in from?
Hi, I'm Fran de Leon, and I am calling in from the Chumash and Tongva land.
Hi, everyone. I'm Giselle Tongi Walters, and I am as well, just like Fran, calling in from the Chumash and Tongvan land.
Thank you, Fran and G. So Fran, to start this Q&A, if you could start by sharing what your inspirations were in creating Valor, and if you could talk about how the project started and how it led to this video short.
This all started as a piece. It was a movement piece where I was exploring the history of historic Filipinotown. And I found the monument, and it kind of led me down this path that I had always wanted to take anyway, of telling some of the stories of my family. It's just, there's so much there, and constantly asking my mom for the little tidbits, and she, as I mentioned, writes this long text. I'm not exaggerating about that. Sometimes she says, I'm writing too much, and we just keep encouraging her, please keep talking to us about this, because we want to record this. It makes me wish that I had interviewed my dad and my aunts, but when they were still with us. But because this monument brought back the stories of the veterans, of the guerrilla soldiers, and I had been watching what had been going on in the news and how they had still been fighting for it. And I have to say, I wasn't totally aware of everything. As a Filipino-American, I was not schooled in this at school or even at home. I didn't know all of these details. So in all of this research, I wanted to be able to share that. I wanted to be able to learn more for myself, and then also encourage people to just go out there and see what else you can find about these incredibly brave men and women who served under the American flag and yet were relegated in, they're not even in our American history books, and they're still to this day are fighting to receive their rights, and most of them, a greater percentage of them, are no longer with us. So if there's any recognition at all, it's just their families and their descendants that would be receiving these honors for them. So I just wanted to bring that out there as much as I could. I just think it's so important for us to share our common history, and for us to also learn to take that Filipino-American history is American history, first and foremost.
Thank you, Fran. I also wanted to ask, so I know in the video you said that it started as an original movement piece. Can you touch base a little bit on how it led to this video short?
So the movement piece, which we devised for Grant Park through Playwrights Arena, from there, Jesus and I talked about writing a play, like an actual full-length play. So I started working on that, and we were ready to do a play reading with the Center Theater Group. And then, of course, we weren't able to in April. And so at that point, I thought, well, okay, that's it. Maybe they'll do it next year if there's a next year for play readings. But Jesus got in touch with me and said, can we turn this into a video? And I had no idea what that meant. And I don't know that Jesus knew either, but we both just said yes and started to explore it. And in discussions with him, he said, your research, your family history, the things that you found that tied in so beautifully and serendipitously, that maybe you can talk about that. And so that was the route that we ended up taking. And I really, with my work, I try to be open to whatever it is that, the spirits are leading me towards. And this was where it went. I had interviewed my mom. I put her on, she and I sat across the table with a Yeti mic in front of her, and she was fairly conscious. And I don't think she even, I didn't realize at that point that she was going to end up in a video. She certainly did not. Thanks, Mom. And I followed her narrative, and I let that kind of guide my hands.
Thanks. I mean, I want to share with the viewers. So on November 6th, we will be posting an interview between Fran and my colleague Jesus A. Reyes on CTG's digital stage. The link is in the chat and on the screen. In this interview, Fran talks in detail about her process in creating Valor. I encourage you all to watch that interview when it is released to learn more about Fran's creating process and creative process. So Fran, what did your family and friends say when they watched the video? I know you mentioned a little bit about your mom, but if you have any more stories with that, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, I screened it for my family. We were having a 4th of July Zoom party, as most everybody else was doing on the 4th. And so it was ironic or coincidental or I don't know, magic that we were doing it on, America's birthday, that we would be watching this story about our heroes. As I mentioned, my mom made that recording not knowing she was going to be ending up in any kind of a broadcast. I can't even remember now if I had, warned her beforehand. They knew I was working on it. They had no idea what form it was going to take. My sister Victoria had been helping me gather pictures from my cousins, digging deep into the archives so that I could include them in here. It was an incredibly emotional experience. I mean, I remember that I myself was shaking, partially because of that nervous artist, but also just having these stories in front of us that we had heard about, but to actually, visually experience it ourselves all together, though we were separate, was quite an emotional experience. And I was sitting here watching it with my husband and my son, who is 17, who is, as a 17-year-old, great critic, right, to put in front of him. And I got the thumbs up. Actually, I think I got a double thumbs up from him. So I felt validated from that right there. But yeah, it was really, it was amazing to be able to watch my mom watching it. I think I might have watched her more.
Yeah. I when I first watched Valor, I cried. And I remember emailing Jesus right after, and I absolutely loved the video short. So shout out to Jesus for inviting me to help coordinate this live watch this evening.
Yes.
Go Jesus.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Jesus. But yours and your family's vulnerability in sharing such personal stories made me think about my family, and I had a flood of memories of stories that my parents, my titas, my titos, my ninongs, my ninangs, my nanay, my grandma, all the stories that they've shared with me. And it inspired me, Valor inspired me to start documenting these stories. I went on Amazon right away, bought a nice little booklet, and I'm like writing down all the family stories that I can remember and talk to my mom. So thank you, Fran, for that. But I wanted to ask that, do you remember, or if you could walk us through the journey of what it was like when you first learned of your father and family's involvement in World War II, especially recalling when you found your father's letters and files?
Yeah, I had always known about my dad. I didn't know a whole lot of details. My dad never talked about the war, not even in vague mentions of it around the dinner table. And I think it's hard for most military to talk about their experience. There's a lot of PTSD, and now I look back at my dad and some of the behaviors of his, and I wonder how much of that was attached to what went on there. I had always assumed that his citizenship and our migration here was from his service. He was in the American Legion. He was incredibly proud of being an American, I think equally as being a Filipino. But I only, in working on this, found out that his citizenship did not come from his service, because he, like everybody else, or many others, some of them were given citizenship, but my dad was one of the many who was not. So it was actually through one of my older sisters who had moved here, married an American citizen, got her citizenship, and she petitioned for him. And then he brought the rest of the family over. I was born here, so it was when everybody had already moved here. So maybe that's why, that history had never really been shared with me until I was going through his files and finding all of these denials. And I found the petition papers. And I'm looking at it going, how is this possible that my sister Rose was petitioning for my dad when he's the one who brought us over? And that was mind blowing, to say the least. And yeah, going through his files, which like live with me over here, I can't seem to move them from here to the garage quite yet. I don't know if I'll ever be able to, but I've got that box. And seeing those file folders that he kept for each one of us children, it was pretty intense going through that and seeing these photographs that I had never seen, letters that he kept, down to the silly stuff, like, one of my sister Pia handwriting saying, "Dads, can I go over to my friends tonight?" And then he would write back and say, "Okay." Just really sweet little memorabilia. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I ever felt that part of my dad very much when he was alive, as many people do with their fathers. We had a complicated relationship. So there was a lot of healing for me as well in going through it.
Thank you, Fran.
Mm-hmm.
Well, G, I wanted to ask you, what were your thoughts when you first watched Valor, and what did it mean to you?
Thank you so much, Aurora and Fran. I've known Fran. I've had the privilege of working with her at FilAM ARTS when we did Larry at Leon with the Filipino Workers Center. And I've known of this work, but watching her documentary, I was live texting her as it was showing, and I was just so moved to tears and rage, really, of the injustice towards the Filipino people and our veterans. And so when I heard that you wanted to do this live watch, I really wanted to make sure that we can amplify what Fran is doing, because it's so inspirational to others in our community to also be able to tell our story.
100%. Gee, your work with FilAM ARTS, I know you mentioned, but your work with FilAM ARTS and the Filipino community, how important is it to get FilAM representation and Filipino storytelling like Fran's Valor out there? And I'd love for you to share more about FilAM ARTS work.
Sure. Let's face it, we are going through some major changes right now, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's so important that we have allies in all communities that give us the space for Filipino-Americans to share their stories. I see that Artists at Play is with us today. They are one of the people one of the organizations, as well as John Rivera, who's watching as well, with Playwrights Arena, that gives Filipino-American artists this opportunity to really put their stories out there. And so with FilAM ARTS, we just want to amplify people like Fran, who are in our community telling their stories. And we want to make sure that people pay attention, because just like Fran said, Filipino-American history is American history.
Mm. Thank you, G. Can I snap a little bit to that? I'm gonna snap. Thanks, G.
Sure.
But I want to share with the viewers tonight that G and her amazing team at FilAM ARTS just produced FPAC, Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, right, G? This past weekend. It was a 3-day event, 3 hours each night, 3 hours live, featuring FilAM and Filipino artists. And if you were unable to tune in live, don't worry, because we are going to drop a link in the comments and on the screen for anyone who'd like to watch FPAC, the 3-day event FPAC. So thank you, G. Thank you, FilAM ARTS, for that beautiful event. I loved it all.
Thank you so much. And for the Festival of Philippine Arts and Culture, what we really wanted to do is showcase all disciplines. Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm really adamant about being here tonight is because I've seen how this pandemic has really given rise to so many opportunities for us to evolve. And this is so present in Fran's work. I mean, Fran is an amazing director, as she is a writer and an actor, but who knew that this pandemic would make her a documentary director? I mean, she produced this. And as a producer myself, so much work goes into that. So props to Fran for really being able to tell this story in a different medium, right? And hoping that, you know, this inspires others to do the same.
Yes, thank you, Fran, and thank you, G. You know, I have one more question for myself before we open it up to the floor. Open up the floor to audience questions. So to the viewers through our screen, please start thinking and typing away for any questions that you may have for Fran or G. Fran and G, I want to thank you again for both being a voice to many Filipinos and Filipino-Americans today. And Fran, I want to ask, what are your hopes for Valor's video adaptation, play, and its original movement piece?
You know, I didn't realize that when I first took on this project that it would end up, you know, kind of creating itself into 3 totally different mediums. From the movement piece, I thought I would develop the play and that somehow those would, you know, marry each other. And then now with the video, I don't know if they all kind of tie in or if maybe that's a completely separate thing that we do, because I do think there is something to having the factual historical issues brought out, and then also a different way of presenting it by making it more dramatic and making it more, having more of my family's stories in there, you know, kind of melded in. The play itself, when I started it, I know, again, I hardly ever know what I'm going to do when I start doing it, and then I just like leave it up to the universe. And in the play, it centered more around my family's history and the time during the war. Whether or not that's going to jump forward into the fight that is still going on with the vets, I don't know. So it may be that play lives in that time frame, and then this video would kind of be more of the present time. I mean, my hope is I do want to expand, and Giselle and I have been talking about this ever since she watched it, that we want to expand this into a full-length documentary, and seeing, you know, how we go about doing that. And even within that documentary, how many more chapters there are in there, because when I was writing the play and I realized, you know, here I am, a FilAM woman, and I have a play with, you know, mostly men, granted, you know, men of color. However, I wanted the women, and that's what led me to find out about the guerrilleras. And right there, I mean, I only mentioned, what, 3 or 4 of them, and there are hundreds of their stories, and they blew my mind, what they did, what they went through, just such incredible warriors. And so even them, like, I want to highlight them. Is there a different documentary for them? And is there a different play for Remedios? And, you know, going from Beauty Queen to the Hukbalahap, I mean, they're just such an incredible richness to it. So, yeah, I mean, my hopes are a lot, and I think you know, at some point I just have to kind of narrow it down and say I'm going to focus on this first. I don't know what that is yet, but certainly there's so much more to this documentary than I was able to scratch in these 20 minutes. You know, which is ironic, because when Jesus first told me about the video and he said, I don't know, 12 minutes, I'm like, how the heck am I going to stretch this into 12 minutes? And next thing I know, I'm like, I got to chop. So yeah, so that's definitely what I'd like to do with the video, and for the play, I do want to go back. I got to sit back with my mom and get some more stories, and start creating that as well.
Thank you, Fran. So I'm officially opening it up to our audience. And just so everyone knows who is watching, G is not only a speaker this evening, she is also the magic behind your screens. She is working the back end of this live stream. And I've also asked her to choose the questions and read the questions out loud. So G, please broadcast and read, please.
Yes, so Shirley asks, Fran, do you plan to petition for the Congressional Gold Medal for your dad?
I do. In fact, my mom's best friend in the Philippines, my tita Aleg, has been telling my mom about applying for it. And since my parents had split, my mom felt weird about being the one to apply for it. So it's definitely something that I want to do. And what's great is since I've made some connections with some folks who are much more involved with it than I am and much more knowledgeable, because like I said, all of this was, pretty new to me, that I do want to do that. I want to get started on that. My cousins got theirs for my uncle. So yes, definitely. Thanks, Shirley.
We also have a question from Karina Albert who asks, Fran, you could do an entire film all on your mom's, along with my mom's cuentos. That would be fun to watch. So in thinking about doing a feature film as opposed to a documentary, is that in consideration as well?
Definitely. And, the more I thought about the play, the more I wondered, if the stories would be better served as a film. Because obviously with a play, you have your certain constraints, right? Like, the number of actors that you can have. And I know when I was writing it, I was trying to kind of keep that number down, because those of you who are theater producers know out there, the bigger the cast, the bigger the budget, the less likely you're going to get produced. So, in thinking about that, I have been wondering if maybe it is more of a film. And definitely Karina, my cousin, your mom is for sure going to be a huge part of this, along with my other aunt, my tita Chiling, and the rest of the family. I mean, they were all there during the war, and as I mentioned, I haven't even scratched the surface in terms of the stories that they have shared with me, and certainly haven't even started with the stories that they have yet to tell me.
All right. So we have another question from Lorinda Hawkins Smith. Were you able to visit the Manila American Cemetery and Memorial?
I was not in the Philippines. I'm guessing you're saying, right? I was not. I haven't been to the Philippines since, gosh, my son hasn't even been there yet. So it's been over 20 years since I've been to the PI. And I was not able to visit then. So definitely, I think, once this pandemic is over, and who knows how long that's going to be, but, Giselle and I are going to get on a plane and we're going to start exploring for sure, because the times that I have been to the Philippines, I didn't think to explore these sides of it. It was always about, visiting family, obviously, which was wonderful, but to be able to go back with more of a historical and educational motive, I think would be just wonderful.
We have an amazing question by Colin Cox that says,
that guy.
What do you think is the lesson for all Americans from this piece? Because truly, as a Filipino-American, I walked away, like I mentioned, with, anger and sort of activism on what can we do. But, for all other Americans watching, what do you think that lesson should be?
There's so many, right? But the thing that comes to mind right now is I think that we as Americans have to own our shame in our actions. That we, especially now we're realizing so much about our country, but certainly that the mistakes and the sins of the past, that we have to look at that, and we have to say that, yes, we were the country that did that. And what do we do now in reparations? And, for some it's financial, and for some it is you know, honoring them with medals. There's so many, there are so many sins that this country has that we're still not admitting to. And I mean, you know, taking it to someone like Brené Brown, who talks about shame rules you until you can call on it and admit to it. We as a country, we have to do that. We have to own it and then go forward and then ensure that we never do it again and that we protect, you know, our citizens and, you know, and the world as well. And those, you know, there are veterans in the Philippines who decided not to come to the States and stayed there, and were still also, you know, not given their compensation.
Julie, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. So Gil Mislang does say that the Congressional Gold Medal can be procured. You have to pay for it.
Of course.
$75 from the U.S. Mint, but the formal awards letter you may have to get from your congressman to accompany the medal. We have a couple more questions here from Ben Morant, who says, fantastic work. He may have missed, but when the theaters do open up, do you plan on running the play as originally written, Fran?
Well, first I'd have to finish writing it. It was a work in progress at the point when it was going to be read at Center Theater Group. So, and you know, now that after working on this documentary, I can't imagine that I'm going to go back to writing that play and going in the same path that I was taking, because there's just so much more that it will inform what I feel needs to be said. So I think there is definitely going to be some reworking there. It would be, you know, still some years until that play would be ready, and certainly I think, you know, till we're ready for live theater at all.
Scarlett Cazares asks, she's really interested to hear more about the movement piece. Can you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks to Playwrights Arena, who is led by John Rivera, who asked me to create a 15-minute just all movement, no dialogue piece for Grand Park a couple of years ago. And we had, I think, 20-something performers, and we worked it was really intense. We had 3 rehearsals to create the entire piece. I knew that I wanted it to be about the veterans. I knew that I wanted to have the visuals of the Bataan Death March, and then also their migration. So there's actually a YouTube video of the piece it was just an audience member shooting it, that was done live, but that is on YouTube, and I believe it's on my website, and if it's not, you'll find it on my YouTube page. And that was, I thought it was, you know, I thought it was really great. I always love creating pieces with performers as opposed to just saying, here, do this. And that collaboration really, really excites and fuels me. So that was 15 minutes. And we basically went from, you know, the historic Filipinotown into honoring the men and women. And initially I had, you know, I talked about the jeepney in the video, and my dream was that at the end of this, that jeepney would come back to pick up the performers and take them away. But in bringing that jeepney back, that we would have a few of the living veterans who are in Hi-Fi in historic Filipinotown, that they were going to come and we could bring them on stage and actually honor them live. Unfortunately, it was too much of a trek for them to do that. But I would love some way of being able to get to the veterans who are still alive, so that they know that we are here, that we do, we see them, we honor them, and we thank them. I was able to meet with one and sit and interview him right before the pandemic, right, like 2 days before we shut down. I interviewed Roger Dugdug, and he was just, what a lovely, lovely soul. It was hard for him to recall everything. And what struck me was the struggle that he is still in the midst of in his, in his late last few years, that he's still worrying about money. They had to move out of Los Angeles because they can't afford to live here anymore because he doesn't have the Army pension. I think it was something like, a few hundred a month that he was getting. And it's not right. That's not right.
Fran, great question from Deborah Choi, who asks, what do you do with that anger, knowing that this is not right? How do you release it through the creative process? And after this, we just have time for one more question.
I always try to go, as an artist, I go beyond. I try to go, not beyond, but I know I'm angry, and then I have to find out what am I feeling underneath that, and it's hurt, and it's pain, and I think that's the place that I try to come from. It's so easy, and not to take away from people who feel angry, because you should. This is very upsetting, but I know for me, when I dig deep, and I know that I am coming from a place of pain, that's when I'm able to communicate more. That's when I'm able to be truthful with the stories, and I think that's where we can connect with each other, is through that, unfortunately, that shared pain and understanding. Because if we just come at each other with just anger all the time, then nobody, you stop listening. I stop listening, I know. So I definitely try to go along with that anger to look at the hurt that's there. And John Rivera just commented, pain and anger are great motivators, and absolutely, they absolutely are.
Sorry about that. One last question from Penelope Dong before we say goodnight is, I was wondering if your expanded documentary, Fran, will build on that documentary or delve deeper into some aspects that were not covered because of its inclusion of multiple communities.
Good question. I think for sure we'll go with that as a jumping point. I mean, on any given day, I look at the documentary and I go, oh, I want to go this way. I want to explore this, aspect of it more. And oh no, I want to go this way. So it's hard for me to decide right now, because as I said, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I will approach projects fairly open to which way I'm going to go. I'm sure it's probably really frustrating for people who are working with me, because I go, oh no, let's do this instead. So which is why it was good that it was just me and my laptop doing this documentary, because it was only me that would get mad at myself for changing everything at the last minute. Yeah, I think for sure this is a jumping point. I mean, I would love to create, several of these specifically for the guerrilleras, because each one of them is a full documentary.
Yeah.
So there's so much here. I mean, I feel like I could basically spend, like, Giselle and I can spend the rest of our lives just telling the stories of these guerrilleras without even, touching upon the rest of it. So yeah, jumping point for sure. And then at some point, I guess we have to, hone in and focus a little bit.
So Filipino-American History Month just ended yesterday.
Yeah.
And I just want to speak on behalf of the Filipino-American community, Fran, how you are a shining light in our community for telling these stories. So thank you. You are making history by doing this. And I know that it is inspiring others in our community to do the same. So maraming salamat, Fran. And thank you, Aurora, for partnering with FilAM Arts and on behalf of, obviously, Center Theater Group.
Yeah, thank you so much to both organizations for your support in this. I mean, it really, truly, I was writing an email to someone and I said, this was kind of a homegrown project, very small. And I really was not expecting for CTG to give it this much of a life. And I certainly was so grateful and thankful to Giselle for right away stepping in and saying, we want to co-present. It was really just such a beautiful unification of these arts organizations that are promoting Filipinos, Filipino-Americans, and the arts in general. So, salamat.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you to Fran, G, and to Lucy for joining us this evening, and to FilAM
Thank you,
Arts.
Lucy.
Yes, thank you, Lucy. And to FilAM Arts for co-hosting this event with Center Theater Group. Thank you to the Education and Community Partnerships Committee and team. And thank you to the California Arts Council and the Friars Charitable Trust for funding community programs at CTG. And a big thank you to all of you for watching Valor with us tonight. If you have any family and friends who weren't able to join us tonight, have no fear, because you can find this live watch on Center Theater Group's digital stage on November 6th, including Fran's Valor, her interview with Jesus Reyes, and additional community stories from local artists. The link is in the comments and on the screen. Thank you, G. Additionally, please visit Fran de Leon's website for additional information on Fran, her works, and keep up to date on all things Fran. Link is also in the chat and on the screen. Maraming salamat sa inyong
And
lahat.
thank you, everybody. Please vote.
Yes.
November 3rd is coming. If you haven't voted already, hopefully you have.
Yes.
Please, please, please vote, vote, vote.
Thank you very much,
all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.